Video games and movies, a seemingly cursed duo in the world of entertainment. It's hard to make a good video game adaptation of a movie, and it's borderline impossible to make a good movie adaptation of a video game.
Oh shit.
But if there's one movie genre that's been trying to tap into the video game market since forever, it's the horror genre. While there have been some good attempts at movie horror games, nothing blew open the formula harder than Dead by Daylight. Once the idea was out there, it seemed almost obvious. Everyone loves horror movie villains, right? So why not have one player take control of the killer and the others take control of the victims? This formula was so successful that people have been making games around the concept for years since then, and why wouldn't you? The game makes itself. All you need is 5 players and boom. You don't have to do any campaign scripting or anything, just a couple of maps and the players will come and they will make the experience for themselves, right? Yeah, so it turns out it's a little more complicated than that. Dead by Daylight didn't just crack the formula, it dominated it. Why play the Friday the 13th game when you have another game where you can just play as or face off against the likes of Pyramid Head, the Demogorgon, Pinhead, Mike Myers, the list goes on. And the answer to the question is that you wouldn't. This is a big reason why I was a little bit concerned when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game was announced. While it looked fun and interesting, it was only launching with 3 maps and its base concept was tailored only after a single movie. Definitely not enough content and future possible content to keep a player base from moving on to a similar game with mountains more content and players. And that's something you cannot have when your game only works when you have 7 players. But previous concerns aside, I have actually played several hours of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre now, and I'd like to give my honest thoughts on the game. So just to get this out there, the game is good. It's not amazing, but it is good for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the overall gameplay system really meshes together and feels fresh when compared to Dead by Daylight. The way it works is that there are 3 killers from the Slaughter family on the loose, and there are 4 survivors that the Slaughter family has kidnapped. Prior to the match starting, the survivors have all been pretty badly tortured, so they have to escape the area before they bleed out. In every match, all the survivors will start in the basement area with just Leatherface, and upon escaping, they'll have to navigate their way around the other 2 family members using lockpicks and other items to get through doors and open exits. And since we're talking about the good stuff in the game right now, I'll just talk a little bit about the killer gameplay and not survivor, because the family gameplay is fantastic in this game and really the star of the show. The decision to have 3 killers that need to work together to take out the victims was a good move because it makes you actually think. The killers in this game aren't weak, but they all have their drawbacks that can be turned into assets if you're mindful. Leatherface has his chainsaw, which he has to rev up, and he's really just a tank. No matter what, there always needs to be a Leatherface in the match because this guy is an enforcer. When you're playing Survivor and Leatherface enters the area, it's your cue to just go somewhere else because he locks down the area he's in. The Cook is definitely my least favorite killer in the game. His whole thing is listening out for survivors, and I really don't know what other utility he's got since his damage and speed and stamina is all pretty low. The Hitchhiker is a jack of all trades, and he can plant traps for his victims to run into, as well as move through crevices and crawl spaces just like the victims can. Johnny, in my opinion, is the best killer in the game. He can track victims' footprints and will listen out for them nearby. All up, he's just really well-rounded and might actually break the whole teamwork idea of the game because he's just got the damage, the stamina. He barely needs other family members to help him out with his kills.
Knew I should have handled this myself. I'll fix it.
Sissy is the last killer to talk about, and like the Hitchhiker, she can traverse the world like the victims can, as well as sneak. She also has the ability to poison victims, which I'll be honest, I don't really know what it does, since when it happened to me in the game, I was already getting fucked up, so I didn't really know the byproduct. One thing I like about playing Sissy is that she can actually sneak around, and she looks like a survivor. So there were points when I was able to sneak up on other survivors, and they either didn't notice me, or they didn't pay any attention to me because I just looked like I was one of them. All up, the killers feel pretty great to play, if not stiff sometimes. I did have a few times when I found it quite annoying that survivors could just disappear sometimes. But to help us out, there is another mechanic in the game, which is Grandpa. This guy is pretty much a catatonic old man, except when we feed him the blood of victims that we've hit, the guy will let out a scream which will reveal victim locations if they're moving. Through the match, Grandpa can be upgraded by feeding him more blood to the point that survivors will be permanently outlined. which actually causes a few problems for the game, but since we're still talking about the good stuff, I'll save it. Something this game does really well is the atmosphere and graphics. I mean, the levels are just beautifully designed. There would be times when I was running around as the killer and I just had to take a second to appreciate how damn good the environments look. When you put the original movie and the game side by side, it's very clear that the developers were very passionate to the amount of detail they put into replicating it. But all the good environments in the world can't outrun bad gameplay. While managing to evolve the Dead by Daylight formula for the killers, the survivors are relatively unchanged. Each of them have their own unique ability to help them survive, as well as a skill tree that you can upgrade. Yet it feels extremely underpowered and underwhelming. I know it's the point of the game and all, but the killers just seem to be heavily favored in these matches. They've got more tools than ever to hunt down the survivors, but the survivors themselves still have to rely on the sit at objective and do thing for a while model. Not to mention that if you make too much noise, all the killers will be alerted to where the noise came from. So your best hope in this game is to sit at the objective, hope grandpa doesn't scream, hope that no killers show up, and hope that you don't make any noise. And you think that this difficulty might actually be offset by teamwork, but the game doesn't really emphasize teamwork between players. There's no objectives that can be completed faster if more players are doing it, like generators in Dead by Daylight. So really most of the time, the only reason your teammates will actually help you out is when they fuck up and draw attention away from you, which is a little bit of a problem, considering that once the attention is back on you, you've got no recourse, and you need to be undetected to unlock any of the exits. So the game doesn't really emphasize survivor teamwork, yet you can't really survive without the rest of your team. It kind of just feels like the devs had a great idea for how the killers would operate, but when they came to the survivors, they were just like, I guess we'll drop in the Dead by Daylight formula. Minus the generators. Overall, I think it makes playing Survivor not super fun, which is a shame considering how thrilling about 80% of Survivor gameplay is. I love evading Leatherface and then getting to the surface to continue my escape, but the curtain begins to fall once you realize that if you're spotted, your run is pretty much over, and that can get really frustrating when you're doing well for most of a match, then you mess up the tiniest thing which costs you everything. Like at the end of this match, I had done everything right. The killers were on the other side of the map, but they knew where we were, so all I had to do was lockpick this gate and sprint out of there. Yep, I didn't know that the lockpick could break, and from that point, since the whole family had rolled up, that run was over. And you can see how this can get frustrating when stuff like this doesn't happen when you're playing killer. You can fuck up multiple times during a match as a killer and still clean house. So it's obvious that there's some balancing issues, which are expected on launch day for multiplayer games. Some other launch day issues I got were me being kicked out of lobbies for various different errors and the blood effects just making my game stutter, but I'm not really thinking about that stuff too hard since all of that can be fixed in time. Really, I think that this game's biggest problem is already showing up just hours after release, and that problem is general interest in the experience this game offers. While the gameplay is pretty alright, the big issue here is the player count. Jumping on the game just hours after launch, I was often looking at nearly 3 minutes to find a match, and if you do find a match, there's a chance you won't play it because once again, player count. If there's not enough players in the match by the time it's meant to start, the whole thing cancels out, you're sent back to the home screen, go find another one. I was being paired with people from different countries so often that the latency issues started seeming like they were actually part of the game, and sometimes you'd just be mid-match when the game decided, nope, your latency is too high, goodbye. Like this time when I couldn't figure out why I couldn't open doors or power down my chainsaw. Turns out I actually wasn't connected to the server and I hadn't been for about 2 minutes. For a game that needs 7 players to participate in a match and I'm having a hard time getting in just 1 doesn't bode well for the game's future. And I'll just say, I think that this was the wrong game at the wrong time. I've seen a lot of talk online about this game and the people do not like the Dead by Daylight comparisons, but it is inevitable. Dead by Daylight does a lot of what this game does, just with way more content and way more scope. You don't have to like Ghostface to play Dead by Daylight because maybe you like Albert Wesker, and if you don't like him, then maybe you're like the next licensed killer they add. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies are already not super accessible to mainstream audiences, and when we start talking about future content for the game, All I'm really thinking they'll be able to add is maybe locations and characters from other movies, which is cool, but I can't help but wonder, will it be too late? The game really reminds me of Predator Hunting Grounds, a game that came out in 2020. Pretty much, it was a 4v1 game where you played as soldiers or a predator. The soldiers had to complete a mission, and the predator had to kill the soldiers. I loved the game because it was so well made, and the matches could go so many different ways. You could complete your mission and extract without so much as a tussle with the big man, or you could end your match sprinting away from a defeated predator as the player controlling it decided to set off its explosive charge. The problem with the game was that it launched with just that premise, and the players could only be interested in that for so long. I bought Predator Hunting Grounds 2 weeks after it released, and after about a week of playing, matches started to get really hard to find. It's a sad fate for a competently designed game, and I can honestly see this happening to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, the DLC on offer is just more kill animations for the family members, which is just a nothing burger. There's no other way to put it. Really, I can't see this game having much of a presence by the end of the year. I'd love to be wrong, but at the time of recording, I've played 5.6 hours, and I feel like I've pretty much seen everything there is to see. So, should you buy this? Should you spend 58 AUD or 37 USD on an experience that probably won't have a player base by the end of the year? Let me think. No, I'll say it's a fun game, but the experience on launch is just not worth your dollary dues. However, since it is fun, go get it on Game Pass. Otherwise, steer clear.